Okay, great. So yeah, tonight we're going to be exploring going for refuge. That's the theme of this evening, is going for refuge. Now, some of you may be familiar with that term, some of you might not be. But the reason why we're looking at going for refuge this week is kind of this week is kind of bookended by 2 evenings on the Monday night. So last week we had people coming back from getting ordained, and next week we're going to have that again. So there's 2 weeks where people are getting back from getting ordained. And yeah, we're kind of welcoming these new order members back. So people that wear this white case, that they're order members. And yeah, going for refuge is an important part of that. So just for those of you that aren't aware of it, I'm just going to talk a little bit about what that is. So when you get ordained, you basically you train for a number of years, and then at some point you're invited to join the order, and then you go up the mountain for 11 weeks. And then you come back down, so you receive a new name, and then you come back down, and then you're welcomed back. So that's what we're doing on those 2 evenings. And so like I said, you train for many years, and then at a certain point, you're the people that know you and the person who is going to ordain you, they kind of think that, okay, this person is effectively going for refuge. So that's why it's important. It's kind of a way that people see if they think they're ready to get ordained, is they're going for refuge. And I think so the reason we're doing this tonight is just to make sense of that, make sense of those things going on. So I don't know if many people were here last week or next week, but that's kind of the context that we're doing this in. But what is going for refuge? So it's kind of like can roll off the tongue, but actually what is it? And we're going to basically spend the whole night exploring it. What does that mean for us? What does that mean for our lives and our practice? What is going for refuge? So I won't be able to quickly summarize, but just to say it's kind of where someone starts putting the spiritual values at the center of their life, basically. But I'll unpack what that means throughout the evening. And it goes all the way back to the time of the Buddha. So at the time of the Buddha, he was kind of wandering around teaching, and people would just be going about their lives, basically. There'd be people at the time of the Buddha going about their lives. They might be fine, they might be in a lot of suffering, or they might kind of be quite pleased with themselves. They might think they're doing pretty well. And then the Buddha kind of encountered all of these sorts of different people. He'd encounter them and he'd give them a teaching. He'd teach them something in various ways. He'd teach using different methods, but he'd give them a teaching. And when they received that teaching, they would be irreversibly changed. Something would completely shift in them. They'd be irreversibly changed from their meeting with the Buddha. And then they'd recite the following refrain. So this is obviously from the traditional texts. So they were kind of orally transmitted. So there's a lot of repetition. But in these texts, whenever someone has encountered the Buddha and received a teaching, and it's kind of had a kind of awakening effect on them, they recited this refrain. Superb Venerable Gautama, so that's the name of the Buddha. Venerable Gautama has made the Dharma clear in many ways, as though he were turning upright what had been turned upside down, revealing what had been concealed, showing the way to one who is lost, or holding up a lamp in the dark. Those who have eyes see forms. Just so the Venerable Gautama has illuminated the Dharma in many ways. To the Buddha for refuge I go. To the Dharma for refuge I go. And to the Sangha for refuge I go. So in a way, this is the beginning of going for refuge. So it's kind of this people in a state of, you look at this here and you can kind of see that once they've met the Buddha, they kind of could see that they are in a state of confusion. So these images, so as if turning upright what had been turned upside down, revealing what had been concealed, showing the way to one who was lost, or holding up a lamp in the dark. So in a way, it's kind of like they were confused, there was confusion, they were lost, things were concealed, and the Buddha has shown them the way, he's revealed what was hidden. So it's kind of, it's interesting that it's not like, oh, I was sinning and now you've saved me. It's kind of just, oh, I'm just in a state of confusion. I'm just confused, or I couldn't see, and now you've shown me. And then through that, they then go for refuge to the Buddha. They go for refuge to the Dharma, his teaching, and they go for refuge to the Sangha, which is the community of people practicing his teaching. So that's the history. Well, that's kind of the origin of going for refuge. But tonight we're going to go into more detail about why what going for refuge is and why would we want to do it, basically. So if you continue practicing Buddhism, you'll come across this phrase again and again, going for refuge, and you could say that this is the central Buddhist act. It's the central Buddhist act of a Buddhist life, and it's when one's life begins to be centered on spiritual values rather than mundane values. And so it's interesting to look at the phrasing. So it's kind of refuge. A refuge is it's the state of being safe or sheltered from danger or difficulty. So in a state of danger or difficulty and being sheltered from that. But then it's also going for refuge. So it's active. Someone is going for refuge to the Buddha, going for refuge to his teaching, going for refuge to the Sangha, the community. So it's not I believe in the Buddha, I believe in his teaching. It's I go. So there's something active about it. So there's this active element of going for refuge, but one of the main things to realize is that we're always going for refuge to something. So in the Buddhist tradition, when we say going for refuge, it's kind of talking about going for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. But all of us are always going for refuge to something, whether we realize it or not. Everyone is going for refuge to something. We're always going towards something because we think it will give us safety, we think it will give us shelter, we think it will give us satisfaction. And tonight we're going to be exploring why we go for refuge, why do we have that urge to go for refuge to things, but also why do some things work and some things don't work. So I've got a flip chart which I'm going to reveal all at once, but don't worry, I'm going to go through it gradually. So here's my flip chart. So do make sure you can see it, because this is pivotal to the... I'll just turn it a little bit more this way so you guys can see it. So yeah. So this is to explain to us why we go for refuge and why some refuges work and some don't. So let's begin. We'll begin at the top. So at the top, we've got a lovely drawing here, which was it was teamwork from different members of the team, all adding details in. This is the Buddha. So the Buddha's at the top, and this symbolizes not just the historical Buddha, the man, but his realization, the realization of the Buddha. And in a way, it's impossible to say what the Buddha's experience was, what the Buddha's realization was, which I've cleverly symbolized by not using words. I've used an image instead. So we've got the image of the Buddha to represent there's an experience there that we can't describe in words. It can only be lived out. It can only be experienced. And it's possible for any human being to experience that, but that's what the Buddha experienced. And that is where Buddhism began, was with the Buddha's enlightenment, and that is where Buddhism is headed. So anyone that practices Buddhism, that's the direction it's going in, is in the Buddha's realization. So Buddhism begins and ends with the realization of the Buddha. And then the Buddha, he didn't just stay in his experience, he then tried to communicate it. But like I said, it's not possible to fully communicate what he experienced in words. So he basically tried to hint for us. He tried to give us hints about how we could do it. But he also said a little bit about what experience is like, but he couldn't say fully. But he chose, what the Buddha said was like, I could teach infinite things, but I've chosen to teach a few things to help you escape suffering. And he said there's three things about reality, basically. There's three things about reality, and they're not all he could have said, but he thought they were useful things to point out because of the state that we're in. And these are called the marks of existence. So these are really fundamental in Buddhism when we're thinking about like insight, or the Buddha's insight into what reality is. So he said that reality is, our experience is insubstantial. So it's there's no fixedness, there's no essence to things, there's just a flux. There's just a constantly flowing flux of things, and there's nothing beneath it. There's nothing right at the bottom that stays fixed, that stays permanent. It's always in flux. And then, he said they're impermanent. So everything's changing, basically. Nothing stays as it is. Everything's always in a state of change. And also, no matter who we are, what our life circumstances, there will always be an element of suffering to our experience. And there will always be an element of unsatisfactoriness to our experience. So these are the three. So there's insubstantiality, impermanence, and suffering and unsatisfactoriness. Now, it's important that we don't need to take these as metaphysical truths or metaphysical teachings. He's pointed these out because they're helpful to us. He pointed them out because they're going to be helpful to us to liberate our minds. And the reason why these are helpful is because the Buddha saw that actually commonsensically, we see things as the opposite. We assume things are substantial. We assume there's an essence to things. We assume things can be permanent. Even if we know on an intellectual level, on some level, we believe things that can be permanent. And we believe that it should be possible to have an existence without suffering. So when we experience suffering, we think that something's gone wrong. When we don't find something satisfying, we think things have gone wrong. So it's kind of the reason why he's pointed these things out is because we're born believing the opposite. We think things are substantial, we think things are permanent, and we think things are possible to be satisfying completely and fully, and we think it's possible to live in a way where we don't suffer. So it's kind of the Buddha said this is what existence is like, but he did that just to point out to go against the way that our minds are naturally inclined. Okay, are you all with me so far with the diagram? Okay, so we've got the Buddha, his realization, we've got the marks of existence. And the reason why these are a problem is because when we believe the opposite, when we believe that things are substantial, permanent and satisfying, when we're actually confronted with reality, we then suffer. So we believe they're one way, but actually they're the other way. They're the opposite. So they are insubstantial, permanent, and unsatisfactory. That leads us to suffer. So that's the reason why I pointed them out. It's because it's believing believing the opposite of the marks of existence. That's what's causing us to suffer. And there are different kinds of suffering. So the Buddha taught three. He kind of categorized suffering into three broad categories. So the first one is physical and emotional pain. So that's kind of like you hit your head, it hurts. If you're ill, your body aches. All of that sort of thing. And then emotional pain is kind of like sadness is unpleasant, anger is unpleasant. We get into mental anguish and mental turmoil. So it's physical and emotional pain. That's the first kind of suffering. The second is the pain of resisting change. So inevitably things change in our lives. There are things that we like, and there are things that we want to hold on, things that we don't want to change. But when they do, we then experience pain. And because we believe that things is possible to be permanent, when they change, we then suffer because we resist that change. And it's that resisting the change that then makes us suffer. So these are the first two. And then this final one is more subtle. But it's the pain of experiencing a self. And so the common sense way that we experience the world is there's a self in here and a world out there, and there's kind of like a polarization between the two. And that in itself is painful. From a Buddhist perspective, that in itself is painful. So even if we have absolutely no physical or emotional pain, we're happy and our body's healthy, even if most things seem to be staying the same, even if we don't have either of these kinds of suffering, just the experience of feeling like, oh, I'm me here and you're all out there and the world is out there, that is painful in comparison to the Buddha's experience, in comparison to the freedom and the liberation of the enlightened mind. The experience of a self is painful. So there's the Buddha saw that we instinctively see things the opposite to this, so he taught this, and then because we don't see things in this way, we then suffer physical and emotional pain, pain of resisting change, and the pain of experiencing a self. So before I go on, are there any questions about this bit here? Yeah.
What's the red word in the middle?
Okay, yeah, delusion, or confusion, but delusion's stronger, so it's good. And that's basically the delusion. This is the way things are, and actually, if we fully knew this, we wouldn't be suffering. If we fully knew that things were insubstantial, impermanent, and unsatisfactory, we wouldn't suffer. But because we're deluded, then that leads to these kinds of suffering. Yeah, so yeah, this is delusion here. This way is delusion down here. Yeah.
How does not believing the Mass resistance prevent physical pain?
So the Buddha did experience like physical aches and pains, but he wouldn't have then resisted it and he wouldn't have pushed it away. So in a way, a pleasant sensation and an unpleasant sensation wouldn't bother the Buddha. The Buddha wouldn't mind either way, really. So it's kind of like it would just be passing sensations. So some sensations are pleasant, some are unpleasant, some are neutral. When we experience unpleasant sensations, we push it away, we panic, we worry, we think about, what's going to happen if this carries on? Whereas the Buddha would just experience it arise and pass in complete equanimity. Yeah, so in a way, it's a bit more. It's not that it would stop if the Buddha got hit by something. If someone hit him with a stick, he would know, there's pain in my shoulder, but he wouldn't resist it, and he wouldn't then start resenting the person that hit him. That kind of thing. Yeah. So yeah, it doesn't stop the actual pain, but it stops the resistance, the pain. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, so we're deluded, we're confused about the way things are, so that leads us to suffer. And then, because we're suffering, we then long to be free from that suffering. So we all have a longing to be free and liberated from this suffering. And we could say, in a way, it's kind of, we all have an intuition that this is possible. Some part of us knows that it's possible to live in this way, in the way the Buddha does. On some level, we know that that's possible, but we're experiencing this. And then because we're experiencing the pain, we're longing to be free from it. We long to be free from physical pain when it's there, from change, the pain of change. But I think mainly, probably primarily, it's this one. It's the pain of experiencing a self that we're constantly feeling, but we're probably not aware of. And we're just longing to be free from that. There's this yearning to be free from that. So then what we do, we look for ways to escape from it. We look for ways to escape. And there's two ways we go. There's false or limited refuges, and there's true refuges. So for the next bit, we're going to look at this, and then after the tea break, we're going to come back and look at what the true refuges are. But I'm going to say a little bit about false or limited refuges now. So I'm just going to get my pen out. So the thing with one thing, I'll probably repeat this, but one thing just to be aware of is that when we're talking about false refuges, we're not necessarily saying that the thing itself is the problem. It's the fact that we look for things in it that it can't give us. It's the fact that we attached to things in a way that we think it's going to fulfill us in a way that it can't. So there's certain things that we look for. So we look for So we look for pleasure. So we experience suffering. But we believe that actually life should be pleasurable. So we look for pleasure in things. We look for permanence. So we experience impermanence, but we believe that actually we should be able to experience permanence. So we look for things that will give us permanence. And these are all linked as well. So we kind of look for permanent pleasure and satisfaction. So we look for satisfaction in things. We look for things that can give us ultimate satisfaction. And again, so permanent satisfaction. We look for things that can give us security. So we look for security in things, and then we look for things that will reinforce our sense of self. So again, this is more subtle, but we look for things that will reinforce, oh yeah, I exist, I'm in the world, I exist, and I'm here, basically. So we look for things to give us ultimate and lasting pleasure. We look for things to give us a sense of things are permanent. We look for things to give us satisfaction, security, a sense of self. And yeah, it's the fact that we are looking for these things from the things that's the problem. It's not that the things themselves, when we're saying false and true refuges, we're not just writing up a list of being like bad, 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 and then like these are the good things. It's kind of like, it's the fact that we look to these things in a certain way, we grasp after things from it, that's the problem. So there's these false and limited refuges. So there are different ways of talking about it. But yeah, so one of the things is they're limited. So some things will just be wholly bad for us, but some things will actually give us some refuge, but they'll be limited, they'll run out on us. So either they'll come to an end, and then we'll be anxious and insecure because the thing's ended, or kind of like a law of diminishing returns, kind of like when you eat the first, this is kind of like a bit twee example, but when you have a first slice of cake, you're like, man, that cake's good. In the second slice of cake, you're like, it's still nice. And then the more you go, the worse it gets. It's kind of that kind of thing. And you can look to that in all aspects of life. There's much darker examples that you could conjure up as well. So they're limited. And then they temporarily distract us as well. They temporarily distract us. They temporarily distract us from the pain. So we might be experiencing suffering and we look for things that are going to temporarily distract us. So I'll give you an example of one from my life, and then we'll talk for a few minutes about what other ones we could think of. But for me, for a long time in my life, I basically went for refuge to the idea of being successful, to the idea of kind of being, what did we call it? The hustle. That was what I was running a business with my friend, and we referred to it as the hustle. And it was like, yeah, we're going to work really hard, we're going to get really successful, we're going to get rich, we're going to do really well. And it was basically, that was what I thought. That's what I thought was going to give me pleasure. I thought it was going to give me satisfaction. I thought it was going to give me security. I thought it would be permanent. I thought success would be permanent. So kind of, I imagine, once I'm successful, that would just be me forever. And it also reinforced my sense of self. So I was running a video production company. It's kind of like, I'm a video guy. And then I can meet people and I'll tell them, I do video. And it'll be like, video guy. So kind of like all of these things is kind of like I was looking for a refuge in it. It was kind of what I was putting my energy and time and emotion into, in the hope that it would give me these things. But obviously it can't do all that. It did run out on me. Got to a point where I was kind of like, actually, can I just keep doing this? Kind of like it got less and less satisfying the more I was doing it, and it felt more and more kind of like, I don't know, the security of it, the illusion of the security kind of fell away. And it ran out on me. So I think what we'll do now is we'll just spend a few minutes. Lost Nika. Yeah, it's good. That's right. Yeah, it'll be fine. Okay, so you're welcome back. So before the break, we were talking about false or limited refuges and why they're limited, why they don't work. So I'll get another flip chart up, and we can go through. So, can anyone tell us what were you talking about? What refuges did we go to?
The internet.
The internet. Yeah. And what do you think? Why do you think the internet is a false refuge?
Depends what part of the internet you go to.
Yeah. So in terms of, I'll bring that back up actually. Maybe we'll just talk through it. So what ones here do you think you're trying to get from it? So we've got pleasure, permanence, satisfaction, security, sense of self. Or we've got distraction as well. So what sort of things are we looking for?
Distraction and a sense of self.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, so definitely a distraction, isn't it? I think it's really common, like when we're feeling any sort of suffering, it's such an easy thing to do. I think especially with our phones now, isn't it? It's just like, you have like, I notice sometimes I have like one pang of even minor boredom results in like looking at the phone, and then it's such a enticing way to distract ourselves from these different types of suffering. Yeah. And how do you mean what by sense of self? How's sense of self wrapped up in the internet?
Well, if you're posting loads about yourself on Instagram, for example, or if you're looking for validation from dating apps, for example, and it's not all bad, but it sometimes can be, oh, I'm bored and I'm sad and I want someone to love me and think I'm cute. And, if I post and I flick left and right.
Yeah.
Actually,
Yeah, I think having a social media profile, we just build a false identity, don't we?
Yeah.
We kind of paint this picture of ourselves, which we then can see objectively and be like, that's me. So yeah, definitely. And I think what you're saying about like dating apps, like that's such like a pleasure and reinforced sense of self, isn't it? It's like, I'm worth someone liking, and then you get a big rush of pleasure from that. Yeah. So yeah, internet is definitely a very good one. Obviously, that wasn't in the Buddhist canon, but I think if the Buddha was teaching now, it definitely would have made it in. Yeah. Okay, there's some more.
Drugs and alcohol.
Mm-hmm. And why are they a false or limited refuge?
Well, beyond the obvious health side effects, for me, when I was drinking and doing drugs, it was mostly in social situations to, what I now realise, like, curb my social anxiety, made me feel like I'm fitting in, made me feel more likeable to other people. When obviously that's very, very short-term basis.
Yeah,
well,
so
I won't go into the alternative.
Yeah.
That's your job.
Yeah, great. So yeah, it's like, so we've got like say like for example, you're in a social situation, you're experiencing anxiety. That definitely that's physical and emotional pain there, isn't it? You're feeling anxiety and it's really unpleasant, and we're looking for a way to numb that, to get away from that, to escape that. Even distract ourselves from it. And then with drink and drugs as well, it's kind of like you get pleasure from it as well, don't you? It's kind of like a temporary pleasure thing. But I talked about how one of the ways that things are limited is that there's the diminishing returns. So it's like when you take a drug, the first time it's amazing, the next time kind of like probably still good, but then if you then keep on doing that, it just becomes like a darker and darker cycle, doesn't it? Until you're doing it to cope rather than, or because you need it rather than because it's pleasurable. So it's kind of that that pleasure diminishes and decreases over time. Yeah. Okay, so we've got internet, distraction, intoxicants. What other false refuges? What other limited refuges do we have? Yeah. Achievements, yeah. You say more?
To attain a certain amount of money, certain status. I don't know, whatever you do, just trying to be the best at it. That's definitely a sense of self, right? And with that comes an associated sense of permanence, because once you've done that thing, you'll have always done that thing.
Yeah.
And you have this delusional sense that once you've done it, you'll always feel like you'll remember that you've done it. But it just doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
The feeling fades and you're exactly where you were before.
Yeah, it's so easy to go through life like we're just collecting like badges, isn't it? Like this. I don't know if anyone ever did a did Cubs when I was younger. It's kind of like Scouts for Young, and then you get badges on your arm, I think it is, and it's kind of like every time you do something you get to add it and then you've got it there. It's kind of like we can do that with our lives, can't we, where it's like, oh, I've done this and I've done this, and we kind of add them on to ourselves, and it kind of builds up this sense of self. And yeah, I think it does. These achievements feel permanent. It's like, oh, I've got this and then I've done that forever, and that's another thing that I've done with my life. And it's kind of, you make it into a thing that you can hold on to, and that does give us a sense of security, where it's like, okay, well, at least I exist in this way, at least I've got something to show for it. But why doesn't that work? Why don't achievements actually give us, why aren't they a true refuge?
Because they're impermanent.
Say more?
Yeah, they're impermanent. They don't stick around. They keep you you end up chasing them, as opposed to having any sense of actual fulfillment.
Yeah, it's strange. You never seem to remember that you've achieved something. You're always looking at the next thing now. It seems logically that you remember that you've achieved this thing and you'd be fine. But suddenly something even greater appears on the horizon and you start chasing that thing. It's kind of insatiable in that way.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. What both of you said. It's kind of like, once you've got an achievement, it's not like then you are then satisfied forever. It's like you suddenly then need another one. I even experience it with like books. It's kind of like, you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to finish this book, and when I finish it, then it's going to be so satisfying. You like finish it, then you start another book, and then it's like, oh no, I'm going to finish that one. And it's kind of like, if you approach those things in that kind of like, oh, I'm achieving something way, it's just like never ending and unsatisfying. And the same with like life events, isn't it? It's like you get one qualification and then you need another one, or it's kind of all of those things. It's like the goalposts always move, the milestone always moves of where you're actually trying to get to. Yeah.
I think tied in with that one, but slightly different. And I've seen two of my brothers do this. There's sort of life milestones, house, like marriage, kids. One of them's divorced, and the other one, they're already like, should we just have another kid because we don't know what else to do now. And I think they find that very challenging when it's not satisfying, because you very much are told in life that is what you're going for. And so that not working out, pretty soul destroying for them. Although one's not quite realised it just yet. One's gone through it. And I suppose I don't know whether they're permanent as they can be as permanent as your whole life. But I suppose there's no guarantees that they'll last or that they'll be pleasant. Certainly you can look for a sense of self within fatherhood, being a husband, being, proud homeowner.
Yeah, let's come back to the home. Let's stay with the kind of like the family aspect of it. Oh, do you want to say something?
I was going to say relationship as being one of the biggest refuges. Relationship or family. It's so interesting because everything in our society sort of points you to that way, right? But I that's kind of my false refuge, looking for a relationship. But I figure it's not that it feels, even if a relationship lasts a lifetime, it's never the same relationship, right? Because both people are constantly changing, and so the relationship is constantly changing. You picture that you'll meet the right person. They might be the right person at that time, but both of you will change, and you just never seem to keep that in mind, right? And then the world will change also.
Yeah, I'll go back to what you were saying about like children and fatherhood and stuff like that, because it's not to say that having children won't give you satisfaction, that it won't be like a fulfilling and like feel like a valuable thing to do with your life. But I think what you were saying as well, like the changingness of it. If we use children as a refuge, it will inevitably be painful, because you can see it with people, can't you, where their child is a certain age and they love it and they're really nice, and then they grow up a bit and then they go through a difficult phase, and then suddenly there's suffering, and then they get older. And then if people are too wrapped up in their children, if their sense of self and identity and satisfaction is too wrapped up with their children, when their children then leave home, they can be completely lost, can't they? You get people where their child moves out and then they're lost because that was what their refuge was. And I think what you're saying, like, it changes, doesn't it? Our relationships change. So even if the relationships do last, like even if your child did outlive you and they were there for your whole life, it wouldn't be the same relationship. So you couldn't go for refuge with that connection in that way for the whole of your life. You'd need to have something that would go beyond that.
I completely agree. I was a minister for many years here, and then became a father 4 years ago. And it's really fulfilling. I love being a father. I wanted it a long time to become a father. And I don't think it's a false refuge for me, because I'm kind of aware that he'll hopefully move out and have his own life. But even at its best, there's still loads of unsatisfactoriness. I still want the best for him. I still worry for him. I'm wondering, am I doing enough? Am I doing it right? Or there's the doubt, the questions, the kind of the cyclical thoughts that actually it's a huge amount of suffering with being a good, fulfilled parent where everything's going well with a healthy child. It's still, there's a lot of pain associated with the joy. It's not just I'm going to have a kid and, like, if it works out, it'll be wonderful. It is wonderful, and it's also difficult and exhausting and painful and anguish. Kind of, I'm not someone who suffers from anxiety, but it is. You worry. Keep them alive.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's so good what you're saying, because basically you're kind of like echoing what I said earlier, where it's kind of like it's not the thing that's the problem. It's not like, oh no, I should never have had a kid because they're a false refuge, I'm going to put him in the false refuge pile, that was a mistake. It's like, oh no, I'm glad I've done this, it is fulfilling, but actually there's a lot of this wrapped up with it, and I can't rely on it. I can't rely on that to be the thing that fulfills me forever for the rest of my life. So it's not to say that you can't, it's not to say like, okay, let's put it there and then we can't do that. It's just that we can't use it as a true refuge. We can't use parenthood or family as a true refuge. Yeah, thanks for that. That's really good. Yeah. And I guess kind of like what you were saying with relationships, kind of like similar. It's like you can get satisfaction, you can get pleasure and connection and all of those things, but it's just it's limited because they end, don't they? Like either you break up or one of you dies, and then it comes to an end, and then there's pain wrapped up in that. So if that's where you're getting your pleasure, permanence, satisfaction, that's what you're looking, there's going to be suffering wrapped up in that. So again, it's not to say we have to dump it on the false refuge pile and never do it. It's just we can't. It's kind of it's the way that we talk about it. It's you kind of imagine it, but you can imagine these two piles. But it's actually, there are more ways of looking. There are more ways of being. There's like a false refuge way of being and a true refuge way of being, and we're trying to move more in the direction of true refuges.
So is it more like when you see a thing as like that silver bullet thing? It's like get the girlfriend or whatever, and just everything's fine from then on, and then it never will be. It's more that, right? Yeah. And we do that all the time with things. Yeah, that's always going on. And then also, I mean, like a relationship could be fantastic and amazing throughout all of it, actually, for the most part at least. But that's still not the ultimate satisfactory experience, which is experiencing enlightenment. So it's, even if it's fantastic, it's still limited just because it isn't that. Yeah, it's like comparatively as well. That's another thing that Buddha's saying. It's like comparatively to complete freedom, complete liberation, it isn't particularly satisfying if that's possible. I've got some more here, so let's see if we can get them any more.
Money and material things.
Oh yeah, objects. Yeah, we said we'd come back. Can you say more about material objects?
In terms of pleasure, obviously you can use money to buy things that would give you pleasure, whether that's clothes or jewelry or vacations or whatever. but I think it speaks to the satisfaction and the permanence of some experiences. You know, vacations end, clothes get out of fashion. Maybe joy doesn't maybe last a little bit longer, but still. And the law of diminishing returns that you talked about before would certainly take place with that. Where you buy something, you get the rush of that. That rush disappears. You want to get the next thing, and similar to most types of things like that. It doesn't deliver the same punch each time you.
Yeah, I remember. I think I was probably like 13. I was 13 when I first started buying clothes, probably around that age. And I remember like the first time, like I had a T-shirt that I really liked, and it wore out. And I realised that shops change the clothes that they sell. I didn't realise before. I just thought, oh, if I like this T-shirt, I can just buy it for the rest of my life. But that wore out, and then I couldn't buy another one. And it was like a massive like shock to the system. It was like, oh my God, I can never have this T-shirt again. It's kind of like the early seeing of this. Maybe that was what set me on the path. Yeah, it's kind of like all of those things that we kind of like take for granted. And then there's also another a few years ago, probably like 10 years ago now, when I was doing video production, I really wanted a really powerful computer so I could do editing on it, because I had like one that wasn't really working. So I like built up loads to get this like super computer, and eventually I got it, and it was like, oh wow, this is the computer, this is amazing, and I loved it. And then I've had it for quite a long time now, and it basically got to a point where it was just breaking all the time and crashing all the time. And then that thing that I was like yearning for and like lusting after, a few years later then became the thing that I was like cursing and like hitting my head against the table, getting frustrated with. So it's kind of, even things that at first are satisfying can quite easily turn around to be the thing that we then are hating and wanting something else. So yeah, I think they can definitely let us down in lots of ways, material objects.
I met a guy on the train once who said that all he needed in life was 10 million. If he made 10 million quid, pound, I think he said dollars, I don't know. But if he made 10 million, he would be happy. And he was just talking to someone next to me, and I was like, I have to jump in here. And I was like, are you sure of that? And he was like, yeah, absolutely. Because once I have 10 million, I can do this, I can do that, I can make sure all my family are well taken care of, I can go anywhere I want. But I said, you know you're going to want more. As soon as you have all that stuff, holes are going to start appearing in that. There's going to be something just out of 10, or just like 20 million, 30 million. And you're like, no, I'll be fine. I'll be fine, 10 million. Let me know when you get there.
I think basically the view there is, once I have enough money, I can avoid this, isn't it? It's like, once I get this will disappear. And that's basically what these false refuges do. There's these truths about life. There's these truths about life here that then make us suffer. And then the false refuges make us feel like all we need to do is like, this is a problem, this is wrong, I shouldn't be experiencing this. If I only had these things here, then this wouldn't be happening. Like that's what it sells it to us. It sells us all of these things. It tells us, no, this is wrong, this shouldn't be happening. And if I only had these things out here, then I wouldn't be experiencing this suffering. Yeah, so that's what he was expressing there, was like, if I have 10 million, which maybe he thought a lot about that number, or maybe it's just a bit arbitrary, but it's kind of like, once I have this, then I'll have all of the problems to solve this. Yeah, but what the Buddha said is, no, this is an innate part of having an unenlightened mind. As long as you're unenlightened, you're always going to be experiencing this. And we're not going to be able to find refuge in all of these external things. We're not going to be able to find refuge in success, in status, in money, in wealth, in relationships. All of these things, they aren't going to give us the refuge that we seek. They aren't going to protect us from these things. These are always going to exist as long as we have an unenlightened mind. Yeah, so all of these things, they're trying to get us away from these facts here. Yeah, so I'm going to move on to the true refuges now. So we're thinking, what makes something a true refuge? And it's linked to this thing here, how the false refuges, basically there's this mind here There's this mind here that can see how things are. But because we're unenlightened, we then experience all of this suffering and we go outside of ourselves. So the more and more we're going to refuge, to false refuges, to limited refuges, we're moving away from this. But what true refuges do, they don't give us something, they don't promise things that are pleasurable, permanent, satisfying, give us security and reinforce our sense of self. What they do is they turn this back around towards this. So the true refuges, they turn us back around and make us look at our situation. They make us look at our suffering. They make us look, oh, I am experiencing pain. I am experiencing pain when I'm resisting change. And actually I'm experiencing the pain of having a sense of self. So these things, they turn us back towards here and we go towards the suffering. So what we so instinctively turn away from, we instinctively turn away from this here. We're like, no, this is wrong. I shouldn't be experiencing this. We instinctively turn away towards these false refuges. But the true refuges turn us back towards this. And it's through these experiences, it's through looking at our suffering that we can then start to realize these truths for ourselves. Yeah, so we have the true refuges to remind us, to steer us back through here, so we can look at this, which will then reveal to us the truths here. So we'll start to realize more for ourselves, actually things are insubstantial. We'll start to realize a bit more, actually things are impermanent. We'll start to realize that on a deeper level. And we'll start to see, actually, this is just an inevitable part of life, that things aren't going to be wholly satisfying, and we are going to suffer on this particular level. So what we do is we have these true refuges to steer us back towards our experience, so that we can then realize these truths for ourselves. And it's through these truths that we get closer to the Buddha's mind. Yeah, so these are kind of doorways. These are doorways to experience what the Buddha realized. So if we realize on a really deep level that actually there isn't anything fixed within me, there is nothing at any level of my being that is solid and fixed and unchanging, that everything is a state of flux, everything is constantly changing. If we can really realize that on the deepest level, we would then have an enlightened mind. So it's like we can use these to get through. If we really realize on the deepest level that everything is impermanent and we no longer hold on to anything, we're no longer clinging to all of these things in our lives, we can really see that things are impermanent. And that also is a route to have an enlightened mind. And if we can really see how actually all of my suffering, all of my unsatisfactoriness is built on the fact that I cling to these things, then we can then get through and have the enlightened mind. So it's kind of these truths, if we realize them at the deepest level, then we would have an enlightened mind. So what the true refuges do, just to reiterate, is rather than taking us away from all of this, rather than steering us away with false promises of pleasure, false promises of permanence, false promises of satisfaction and security, they turn us back around. They turn us back around towards our suffering. And then through our direct experience, through the suffering, we can then realize these truths for ourselves. And then that's how we can then get through to an enlightened mind. And the thing is, if we realize these truths, we wouldn't experience all of this suffering in this way. So we wouldn't need to then look for these things. So it's not that we're saying actually true refuges are permanent in a certain way, or they are pleasurable in a certain way, or they do give security. The reason why they satisfy these things is because they transform the suffering that we experience. Through the insight into these things, we're then not experiencing the suffering. Yeah, so is there any questions before we move on to actually what the true refuges are? Does that make sense? Yeah, so we're turning us back towards these things here. Yeah.
So is it, when you say like you're not experiencing the suffering, is it that, I'm just thinking about like the example of physical pain, right? So it might be that you still feel the physical pain, but you're not resisting it, or you're like more able to be with it rather than to like fight it, and therefore it's not painful in the same way as if you're just like, I just want to escape this.
Exactly, yeah. It just becomes another sensation. So there's always pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral sensations, but they just become just another. There's no preference. There's no preference for pleasant experiences over unpleasant experience. There's just experience. There's just sensations, yeah. Okay, so yeah, the true refuges within the Buddhist context, so they're the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. So we've got the Buddha up there, and then the Dharma is the path that the Buddha taught, the practices that the Buddha taught, and then there's the Sangha, which is the community of the people that are practicing his teaching. So the Buddha's an enlightened human being. So he's a human being that gained enlightenment, and he's kind of like an embodiment. He's an embodiment of the human potential. So the human potential is the enlightened mind. So it's kind of infinite kindness, infinite compassion, infinite awareness. And he's seen into the true nature of things. So the Buddha experienced fully these truths. He saw fully on the deepest level these truths, which then allowed his mind to be liberated. And the reason why he's a true refuge that directs us back towards this is because he is a constant reminder, like the symbol of the Buddha within the Buddhist context is constantly reminding us that this is possible. So say this is our experience, it's constantly reminding us, actually, this is the direction I'm heading in. I'm not going towards these things here. I'm turning around towards these things to head towards the Buddha. So he's kind of a reminder. He's a reminder that he's there, and that's the direction that we're going in. So that's why we have the Buddha here on the shrine, this big golden Buddha. It's kind of a constant reminder of that's the direction we're going in. And we don't get there through getting wealth. We don't get there through career. We don't get there through having loads of sex and loads of drugs. It's kind of, we do that through practicing the Dharma, through turning towards our experiencing and towards our experience and realizing these truths. And then we've got the Dharma. So the Dharma is the path of practices that the Buddha taught. So he taught ethics, which is your behavior. No, it's not a very nice word. Not behavior. It sounds like telling off. It's kind of like the way that we are in the world, the way that we are with our mind, the way we are with our speech, and the way that we are with our body. Yeah. So he's saying actually everything you do with your body, mind, and speech matter, and there's certain things you can do to move yourself in this direction rather than in like a more harmful direction. So I won't go into all of that now. Like there's lots of information, lots of talks out there. But yeah, so that's ethics. And then there's meditation, so working on our mind. So when we work on our mind in meditation, we get in touch with our direct experience. And when we get in touch with our direct experience, we kind of see all of this. And it's not that, when we're meditating, it's not that we're just looking for suffering. Like we're also looking for pleasant sensations, but it's often, if we're suffering, it's because we're seeing things in a wrong way. And through meditation, we can start to see more clearly where we're seeing things in the wrong way and start to open our mind up towards these truths. So there are meditation practices or insight practices that are designed specifically for seeing into these truths here. So there's techniques that you do for seeing into these truths here. So there's meditation, and then wisdom. So it's kind of reflecting on the Buddha's teachings, reflecting on the Dharma. And then there's other things as well. So that's kind of like the threefold path, but going on retreats is an important part of it. Cultivating friendships with other people, and we'll talk about that more in a second with Sangha. But also cultivating our imagination. Cultivating our imagination is an important aspect of practicing Buddhism as well. So we've got the Buddha, the Dharma, his teaching, and then the Sangha. So that's the community of people who practice the Buddha's teachings. So just quickly, so the Dharma. So we've got the Buddha up here. So the Buddha is reminding us which direction we're wanting to head in. And the Dharma is the means of travelling up in this direction. So it's through practicing the Dharma that we can actually travel in this direction. So there's no point knowing where we would want to be if we can't get there. I feel like a lot of philosophy kind of falls down in this area. They can have quite a sophisticated, compelling, inspiring vision of what reality is, but actually they don't necessarily give you a path to get there. But what the Buddha gave us was he gave us the vision and he gave us a path. So it's the Dharma is how we travel up towards here. So we've got the Buddha at the top. The Dharma is how we travel up. And then we've got the Sangha, which is the community of people that practice or have practiced the Buddha's teachings. And in a way, they're the people that they're the people that we're traveling up with. So it's not that we travel up alone, it's that there's other people trying to do this as well. And by surrounding ourselves with other people who are practicing, we're then encouraged, other people will encourage us and support us to move in this direction. Because the tendency of the human mind and the tendency of just people is we'll naturally do this. And if we're always with people that are constantly going to false refuges, that will be what we're inclined to do as well. So the more we can surround ourselves with people that are also trying to move in this direction towards the Buddha, the more supportive that will be. And yeah, they're trying to see into the truth of things. They're trying to turn towards their direct experience and the suffering, and then we can within the Sangha there's like mutual help to see where we're going wrong. Yeah, so we can help each other move up in that direction. So that's kind of where the true refuges map on. So it's a true refuge because it reminds us the direction we're going in. So the Buddha's a true refuge because he reminds us the direction we're going in. The Dharma is a true refuge because it helps us not turn towards false refuges, but it helps us travel up towards the Buddha. And then the Sangha is a true refuge because the Sangha help us to move up in that direction as well, because they're doing it too, so they're moving up in that direction. So yeah, they're the true refuges. So have we got any questions on the true refuges and how they fit in with all that, or any questions at all about any of this? So we've got a bit of time for questions now before we finish.
Not really a question, but I just thought it was interesting how, as part of helping to relieve the pain of experiencing a self, one of the things we turn to is strengthening our sense of self in the false refuges, right? Because the other ones seem to not, at least not aggravate the suffering, right? So pleasure, you can see that being an antidote to pain. You can see permanence as being an antidote to change. But we don't even know that we're experiencing the pain of self, right? Which is why we think that strengthening our sense of self is what we need.
Yeah.
We really don't have a conception of that there could be any other way to be.
Yeah.
Right. So.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so habitual we don't even realise we're doing it. It's like it's so underneath our normal level of awareness that we don't realise we're doing it, so we don't realise it's painful. And my only experiences of seeing the pain of this is deep in meditation. I don't know if we can be aware of this. Well, I'm sure at some point we could, but I don't know if we can expect ourselves to be aware of this pain on our day-to-day level. The only time I've ever experienced, oh, actually, this is really painful. Oh, God, I am just making a me here and that's really painful, is when I've been on retreat for a long time and doing a lot of meditation. I've started to see that. But in our day-to-day life, it's so habitual that we don't even realise we're doing it. But I think we can see it. We can see it rise up at certain points. So if our sense of self is challenged, that's when it starts to rear its head. That's when we can start to see, oh, that is actually painful. Like say we have an opinion that we hold quite strongly to our sense of self. It's quite important to our sense of ourselves, and someone disagrees with it or challenges it. If we then kind of rear up and want to lash out, you can see, oh, actually that is painful. That is painful that I'm holding myself in that way. But I think just, the underlying sense of oh, I'm here and everything's there and that's painful it's very subtle and hard to see. Yeah.
One of the challenges of being Buddhist is probably not making it part of your sense of self that you're defending at all times, right?
Yeah.
Because then suddenly someone says something that's not spiritual enough, and mad at them.
Yeah.
Someone tells you, come to this false refuge, and no.
Yeah.
But it's something that is so habitual and so hard to always keeping track of. Right?
Yeah. Well, I think that's true. I think it's inevitable that you'll do that somewhat when you first start practicing Buddhism. Like if you identify as a Buddhist, it's natural that at first you're then going to be defensive of it and maybe be out there trying to make everyone meditate and everyone. But the good thing with the Dharma is it's kind of self-correcting within it. Like the more you practice, the more that will... If you're properly practicing the Dharma, those tendencies will soften. So it's kind of like it's got a self-corrective in it. Whereas a lot of the other things in life that we identify with wouldn't have that corrective. They'd kind of reinforce and get more strong. So is everyone... I guess the main thing I'd like you to leave with would be understanding why the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha are true refuges, and why false refuges are false refuges. Yeah. So do we feel like we're clear on why the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha are true refuges as opposed to... Are there any questions on that?
So the Buddha is the goal, the Dharma is the path, and the Sangha is the help along the way?
Yeah, there's like the travelling along with.
Right.
I think it's kind of...
stream.
Yeah, it's kind of to reinforce that direction. The fact that you're doing it with other people, it's kind of like I've mapped it all onto here. Like obviously there would be a million different ways of mapping it, but I guess for the sake of this, they're the encouragement and the support to all be moving up here. And the more people that are doing it and the more we're in contact with people that are doing it, the more likely we'll be able to do that as well.
And probably in a very practical way too.
Yeah.
But really, etc.
Yeah.
It's hard to practice on your own Buddhism.
It's hard to have even an understanding of what you're really talking about if you're doing it on your own, right? You have all the suffering and stuff, you don't really understand how it should feel or what it should look like to be following the path. You might feel like it's something very nihilistic, right? Until you come into living contact with it, it's not really... Once you meet someone, for example, imagine meeting the Buddha is like, even if he's telling you exactly the same stuff you're telling me right now, imagine it's a very different experience. Right? You understand.
I imagine it would be.
But the content is the same.
That's Dharma Night.
So there's something that happens. That would be crazy, yes.
Yeah.
That would be wild.
Yeah.
But something happens there below the level of the content. Right?
Yeah.
Meeting someone who's the embodiment of the thing.
Yeah, and I think having other people too, and what you alluded to is so easy to get into wrong views that it's really important to have other people that we can talk through them with and clarify and make sure that we have an understanding. Because I guess with the Dharma, if we are going to fully practice it, we do need to fully understand it. And we're inevitably, when we first when we're for pretty much the whole of the path, there's going to be some misunderstandings that we're going to need to talk through and clarify our understanding with. Yeah.
And the Buddha did speak to the value of the Sangha in that Ananta story when Ananta said it's half the path. He said that's the whole path.
Yeah.
Friendship is the whole path.
Yeah.
Because it's easy to sort of think, I might do the modern day version of living in a cave and just study and do that. But
yeah. And I think we have... our culture is very individualistic now as well. So I think our tendency, we'd be much more in danger of feeling like, actually, I can just do it by myself. I can read some books, I can watch some videos, and I'm just going to do it by myself. I don't need all of these people complicating it for me. Whereas actually, it's just, and we wouldn't be able to practice in the same way if we were by ourselves. Yeah. Okay. So I think we'll finish there with this, and we'll sit in meditation for a little while. We'll do just under 10 minutes, and then we'll just finish with a mantra. So we've been evoking the Buddha, so we'll do a mantra that's kind of the sound symbol of the Buddha. So we'll meditate for just under 10 minutes, then we'll finish with a mantra. So it's your choice what you do in your meditation now. You could either follow the breath, cultivate some metta, or maybe you'd like to just sit and let any of the teachings just soak in. Om Muni Muni Mahamuni Shakyamuni Swaha. 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 so really nice to spend the evening with you. Thank you for exploring that with me. I really enjoyed going through all that with you, so that's great. So I'm sure lots of you know this, but the London Buddhist Centre is run on donations. So it's everyone on the team here, everyone teaching, everyone supporting around the class is a volunteer. We do this because we just think it's the best thing we could do with our time. So these the classes are done on donations so that anyone can come. But if you can give a donation, if you have at the beginning, thank you. If you could on the way out, that would be great. But also, if you can't, then that's absolutely fine. You're still free to be here and benefit from the classes. So nice to see you all, and then hopefully see you again next week.